Okay, let's continue with factoring. All right, so now I'm in the territory of 3 terms. Okay, but still the first thing I have to do is look at all 3 terms and look for a GCF. And there isn't one. There's nothing in common to all 3 terms. Okay, so there are 3 terms and the leading coefficient is 1. So I'm looking for 2 terms multiplied together to equal 35. Those same 2 terms added together equal negative 12. Since the product is positive and the sum is negative, I know that both of them are negative. Unfortunately, there are not a lot of factor pairs of 35, but the numbers are negative 5 and negative 7. That satisfies both conditions. Again, if you're having problems with that, remember negative 1 times negative 35, negative 5 times negative 7. Those are the only factor pairs. When you add these together, that equals negative 36. When you add these together, that equals negative 12. So these are the numbers that work. So we know now that this factors into an x and an x, and then we use our magic numbers. And we're done. If I have a squared plus 6x minus 16 plus 6a minus 16, again, I always look for a greatest common factor. There isn't one. So again, since my leading coefficient is 1, this is where I look for my 2 numbers whose product is negative 16 and whose sum is 6. Since the product is negative and the sum is positive, we know one is negative and one is positive, and the larger one is positive. So let's do 1 times negative 16, 2 times negative 8. I'm sorry, I had those backwards. And negative 4 times 4. Okay. The ones that work when I add them together to meet the other condition, negative 1 plus 16 is 15. Negative 2 plus 8 gives me 6. So these are the numbers that I'm looking for. So negative 2 times 8 is negative 16. Negative 2 plus 8 is 6. So I know this factors into a, and minus 2, and plus 8. And that's my answer. Okay, x squared plus 10x plus 9. Again, I look for a GCF. There isn't one. Lead coefficient is 1. So I'm looking for 2 numbers that multiply to equal 9 and add to equal 10. Well, the factor pairs of 9, and everything's positive. So I have 1 times 9 and 3 times 3. When I change it to addition, 1 plus 9 equals 10, so that's the pair. So 1 times 9 is 9, 1 plus 9 is 10. So I know now that this factors into x and x plus 1 and plus 9. And that's my answer. And remember as well, you can always check by multiplying. Okay, greatest common factor. There isn't anything in common to all 3 terms, so no, but I always want to check. Since the leading coefficient is 1, that means I'm looking for 2 numbers whose product is negative 2 and whose sum is negative 1. Well, those numbers are negative 1 times 2, which adds up to positive 1, and 1 times negative 2, and when I add those up, that equals negative 1. So 1 and negative 2, the product is negative 2. 1 plus negative 2, the sum is negative 1. So this factors, I have an x, I have an x, I have a plus 1, and a minus 2. And I'm done. Okay, on 45, greatest common factor, three terms, but now I have a leading coefficient that is not equal to 1, which means I have to split and group. So that means I'm going to multiply these. I'm looking now for two numbers whose product is 3 times 2, which is 6, and who add to equal 5, because I'm going to use those numbers to split this term. Okay, well, the factor pairs of 6 are 1 and 6 and 2 and 3. When I change this to addition, 1 plus 6 is 7, so that doesn't work. 2 plus 3 is 5. So my factors are 2 times 3 is 6. 2 plus 3 is 5. Well, if 2 plus 3 is 5, then 2m plus 3m is equal to 5m. Then I bring down my 3m squared and my 2, and now I group them. So I group these two together. I have a plus sign, so I can group these two together without doing anything. Greatest common factor here is m. When I divide, I'm left with 3m plus 2. The greatest common factor here is 1. 3m plus 2. So that gives me a common binomial factor of 3m plus 2. So I get 3m plus 2 times my leftovers, which is m plus 1. Okay. All right, 46. GCF, none. But there are three terms with a leading coefficient other than 1, so I'm going to split and group. So that means I'm going to multiply these and use those numbers. So I'm looking for the product of -60 and a sum of -17. Okay, one's positive and one's negative, and the larger one is negative. Okay, again, if I don't see it right away, I'm going to do 1 times -60, 2 times -30, 3 times -10, 4 times -15, 5 times -12, and 6 times -10. Those are all the factor pairs of 60. Okay, 1 plus -60 doesn't work. 2 plus -30 is -28. 3 plus -10 doesn't work. Oh, this is -20. Duh. And that one does work. Now, if I'm doing my split and group, I always put the -1 first, so I don't have to worry about that when I'm grouping. So -20 times 3 is -60. -20 plus 3 is -17. So -20x plus 3x. And then I'd bring down my 4x squared and my -15. Now I can group these. Since there's a plus sign here, I don't have to worry about it. I'll get the same answer if I do it the other way. I just have to remember to factor out the negative. Okay, so my greatest common factor with these two terms is 4x. When I divide by that, I get x minus 5. Greatest common factor here is 3. And when I divide by that, I get x minus 5. All right, so I have a common binomial factor that I can factor out now. And I'm left with 4x plus 3 in my other factor. Okie dokie. 6y squared minus 17y, whoops, I'm sorry, plus 5. All right, let's see what we can do with that. GCF, there isn't one. There are 3 terms. The leading coefficient does not equal 1, so I'm going to do the splitting group, and I'm going to start abbreviating. I'm lazy. All right, so that means I'm going to find 2 numbers whose product is 30 and whose sum is negative 17, and use those numbers to split up my negative 17. All right, so I've got 1 times 30. I know they both have to be negative since the product is positive and the sum is negative. Negative 2 times negative 15, and there's my winner. So negative 2 times negative 15 is 30. Negative 2 plus negative 15 is negative 17. So that means negative 2y minus 15y is equal to negative 17y. So I bring down my 6y to the second, my 5, and I'm ready to group. But I've got this negative sign here in the middle, so I have to think about that. So this is going to be plus negative 15y. Greatest common factor here is 2y, and I'm left with 3y minus 1. Here I want to factor out a negative. The greatest common factor is 5. Now, when I divide by a negative, that changes the sign, so this becomes 3y minus 1. I now have a common binomial factor that I can pull out, and I am then left with 2y minus 5, and there you have it. Okay. Alrighty, let's see. Okay, 48. Let's see what we got going on here. Okay, finally, I've got one with a GCF. All the numbers are divisible by 3, and each of them have a single x. So my GCF is 3x. So I'm going to start out by writing this as 3x. 6 divided by 3 gives me 2, and then I have x to the second minus 5x minus 12. Okay, so let's see what's going on here. Now I've still got to do my split and group. So I'm going to do my split and group. So that means I'm looking for 2 numbers whose product is negative 24 and whose sum is negative 5, with the intention of using them to split up this term. I'm going to remember that this is part of my answer, but I don't have to do anything else with it. Okay, so let's see. Negative product, so one's positive, one's negative. The sum is negative, so that means that the larger number is negative. So I have 1 times negative 24, 2 times negative 12, 3 times negative 8, and there we have it. 3 plus negative 8 is equal to negative 5. So my numbers are, and I'm going to put the negative one first, negative 8 and 3, negative 8 and 3. So this gives me negative 8x plus 3x, 2x squared minus 12. Okay, plus sign in the middle, so grouping is not an issue. Greatest common factor here is 2x, and I'm left with x minus 4, plus greatest common factor here is 3, and I'm left with x minus 4. I now have a common binomial factor of x minus 4. When I divide that out, I'm left with 2x plus 3, and I want to include in my answer my GCF, and there you have it. Okay, 5a to the third, negative 5a to the third plus 27a to the second minus 10a. GCF, well, the first thing I know, if my GCF, I have to pull out a negative. There is no number in common to 5, 27, and negative 10, but every term has an a. So my GCF is negative a. So I have negative a times 5a to the second minus 27a plus 10. Still have a leading coefficient other than 1, so I'm going to have to do my split and group. So I'm going to multiply these and use those numbers to split it out, and I just remember that my negative a is included in my answer. Okay, so I'm looking for two numbers whose product is 50 and whose sum is negative 27. That means both of them are negative since the product is positive and the sum is negative. So I have negative 1 times negative 50. That adds up to negative 51. Negative 2 times negative 25. And there's my winner. Both are negative, so the order doesn't matter. So negative 2 times times negative 25 is 50. Negative 2 plus negative 25 is negative 27. So this becomes negative 2a minus 25a. Bring down the 5a to the second and the 10. Okay, I'm going to group them now, but I've got that negative sign, so I have to remember this becomes plus negative. Greatest common factor here is a, and I'm left with 5a minus 2. I know I have to pull out a negative, and I can pull out a negative 5. So negative 25 divided by negative 5 is 5a. 10 divided by negative 5 is negative 2. Okay, I have a common binomial factor. I'm going to factor it out. I'm left with a minus 5, and I want to include my GCF. So here is my final answer. Okay, number 50. First of all, GCF. Nope. There are two terms. Oh, I'm going to quit here. My phone's ringing.